In the summer of 1985, Apple's headquarters in Cupertino, California, felt colder than ever. Boardrooms once filled with applause had turned silent. Executives whispered in corners. And in the center of it all stood Steve Jobs, 30 years old, confident, restless, and suddenly unwanted. For years, he had been called a genius, the rebel who turned a garage dream into a global brand. But now, the same people he'd inspired saw him as uncontrollable. That afternoon, the board made their decision. He was fired from the very company he created. Outside the glass building, Steve carried a cardboard box, a few books, a family photo, and one old Macintosh keyboard. Reporters waited in the parking lot, asking, "Steve, what's next for you?" He didn't answer. He just got in his car and drove. That night, he sat alone in his empty Palo Alto home. His success was gone, his reputation shattered. But deep down, one spark refused to die. "I built Apple once," he thought, "and I'll build something even greater." And that night, in failure, began the story of the greatest comeback in business history. Most people would have retired, but Steve Jobs wasn't most people. He turned his pain into obsession. He launched Next Computers, a bold new company focused on building high-end machines for education and business. Every detail mattered to him: the curve of the metal, the sound of a button, the color of the code. His employees said working with him was exhausting, but exhilarating. At night, when everyone went home, Steve stayed behind sketching designs and rewriting ideas. Meanwhile, he bought a small animation studio from George Lucas. It was called Pixar, and while nobody paid attention at first, Pixar would go on to create Toy Story, Finding Nemo, and The Incredibles, forever changing film history. While critics mocked him, while Apple struggled without him, Steve was evolving in the shadows. He was learning to balance creativity with leadership. He was becoming not just a founder, but a visionary reborn. Every failure was sharpening him for the moment destiny would call again. By 1997, Apple was in chaos. The company had burned through cash, and its products were losing relevance. Employees were leaving, and Wall Street had already written Apple's obituary. Desperate for survival, Apple reached out to the one man who once made them great. Steve returned, not with vengeance, but with vision. When he walked through the front doors again, the same halls that had once rejected him now went silent. He wore jeans, sneakers, and a calm expression. But inside, he was ready for war. His first move? Simplify everything. He cut 70% of Apple's products, slashed waste, and told his team, "Focus is saying no to 1,000 good ideas, so you can say yes to one great one." Then he introduced the iMac, a colorful, friendly computer that made people fall in love with technology again. It was bold. It was different. It was Apple reborn. And with that single move, Steve Jobs saved the company that once threw him away. He didn't just return to Apple. He returned to his purpose. By the mid-2000s, Apple was thriving again, but Steve wasn't satisfied. He wanted to change not just computers, but life itself. In 2007, at the Moscone Center in San Francisco, thousands filled the room. The lights dimmed, and Steve Jobs walked on stage in his trademark black turtleneck and blue jeans. He smiled and said calmly, "Today, Apple is going to reinvent the phone." The iPhone was revealed, a device so simple, so revolutionary, it redefined communication forever. No buttons, no stylus, just your fingertips and imagination. It wasn't just a phone. It was the beginning of a new era, the modern digital age. After the iPhone came the App Store, the iPad, and the empire that made Apple the world's most valuable company. And through it all, Steve remained relentless, demanding, visionary, uncompromising, because he knew every design, every product, every moment would define legacy. As years passed and his health declined, Steve worked harder than ever. Colleagues begged him to rest, but he wouldn't. He said, "Your time is limited, so don't waste it living someone else's life." When he finally stepped down as CEO in 2011, the world already felt his fingerprints everywhere. In every pocket, every office, every dreamer who refused to quit. Steve Jobs didn't just build a company. He built a culture, one that believed in innovation, beauty, and boldness. He taught us that failure is only fatal if you stop trying. From fired to fearless. From outcast to icon. From the garage to global domination. His story remains proof that your worst day can become your greatest turning point. Studio microphone closing narration. You might lose everything, your job, your title, your comfort. But if you hold onto your vision, you can build something the world will never forget. If Steve Jobs could be fired and still build an empire, what's stopping you? Subscribe to Path to Billions, where every fall becomes the rise of a legend.